What is the history behind the migration of Indians to the Caribbean? Can it be regarded as slavery? Well, it was called indentured labor. So if you go to the Caribbean region today, the West Indies, where is it? Let's go to the map. So the West Indies is in the Atlantic Ocean, okay, between North and South America, in the Caribbean Sea. All these islands here are the West Indies, the Caribbean region. You have Cuba, you have Hispaniola, which is Haiti in the Dominican Republic. You have Puerto Rico over here, and then you have Jamaica, Kingston, Jamaica, Sabina Park. I'm sure everyone who knows cricket knows that. And then you have the British Virgin Islands, Antigua and Barbuda, St. Kitts and Nevis, Montserrat, Guadeloupe, Dominica, Martinique, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Barbados, Bridgetown, Barbados. Here we have Bridgetown, Barbados. Then you have Grenada, you have Trinidad and Tobago over here, Port of Spain, very famous place if you know cricket. And then you have, yes, so that's about it. That's the Caribbean region. I'm sure I've missed this Bermuda as well. There's the Turks and Caicos Islands. So this is the Caribbean region. Now, Indians know about the Caribbean because of cricket. India plays cricket versus the West Indies, which is a team that's composed of multiple Caribbean nations grouped together. And if you talk about the West Indies cricket team has always had multiple players of Indian origin, right? Rohan Kanhai, Alvin Kalicharan, Ramdeen, Shivnarayan Chandrapal, Mahendra Nagabuttu. I'm sure I'm missing a lot of names. Yeah. Some of the all-time greats from the West Indies have been of Indian origin. Ram Naresh Tarwan. So why do we have so many Indians in the West Indies? And what about the island of Mauritius, Île Maurice? So if you go to Mauritius, it's in the Indian Ocean. You go down south from India and go westwards. And east of Madagascar, you have Port Louis, this is Mauritius. And then you have Île Réunion, which is a French island, which also has a substantial population, but Mauritius is Indian majority. So it's technically part of Africa. The local language is French, or it is Mauritian Creole, and the majority population is Indian, of Indian origin. The majority religion is, if I'm not mistaken, Hinduism. Yeah, so you have that. You also have lots of Indians in South Africa. Lots of Indians there. You go to Durban, for example. Significant Indian population in Durban. Durban over here, next to Pietermaritzburg. Cape Town also, you have Indians there, right? So Indian populations in various parts of the world, all colonial parts of the world. How did this happen? How did Indians end up over here? How did Indians migrate to the Caribbean, South Africa, Mauritius, and so on? So this was a system of what the British called indentured labor. Indentured labor under contract. It was created, the system was created to replace slave labor. Okay? So the British, the British Parliament, it passed the Slavery Abolition Act in 1833. The British, and by extension the white people, Europeans, they like to claim and proclaim on social media, we abolished slavery. We abolished this evil system. Right? Elon Musk says that all the time. We abolished slavery. But the slavery that they abolished, who started it? Who institutionalized slavery that the British ended? They themselves did that. The Americans had slavery. The British used slaves. And then in 1833, the British end slavery. And that's why they're the good guys, apparently. Right? So in 1833, the British Parliament passed this Slavery Abolition Act. And this created a severe labor shortage on various sugar plantations in various parts of the world. Okay? So to replace that, they created the system of indentured labor under contract. In practice, this indentured labor under contract, it functioned as a new system of slavery. It was highly coercive, but it was legally distinct from slavery, from chattel slavery. So indentured servitude is different legally from chattel slavery, because in indentured servitude you have contracts, you have nominal wages, you have time limits, and so on. But in the real world, you had recruitment fraud, you had, you know, physical punishment, you had what they called plantation discipline, you had lethal working standards. Essentially, most workers had no real freedom. They were essentially the same as slaves. They were treated like slaves. When you were brought to a plantation, your life was at the mercy of the white overlord. Yeah, you had to do what you were told. Yeah, so there was a very little real freedom. So the British ended slavery, by passing this act, and then they launched what they called the Great Experiment in indentured migration. And they decided that we will go looking towards India for a large, cheap workforce. Indians are plentiful, right? So we'll get labor from India. So in the 1830s, so 1833, the act is passed. Next year, the English, the British, started a movement of bringing Indian laborers, indentured laborers, to Mauritius, okay, to work on various plantations in Mauritius. Eventually, by between 1834 and 1920, about 500,000 Indians were brought to Mauritius as indentured laborers. Okay, and most of them came from Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, and some of them came from southern parts of India. I've had friends from Mauritius personally. They are mostly from Bihar, Uttar Pradesh. Some are of Marathi origin, and some are of, at least one of my friends was of Tamil origin. Right? So that's what was done. And these laborers, they had to sign contracts, multi-year contracts. Okay, they would work on sugar plantations, sugar estates. Sometimes they would be redistributed like goods to some other places, maybe from one estate, one plantation to another one, sometimes from one colony to another colony, maybe in the Indian Ocean, maybe to the Caribbean, etc. So initially it starts with Mauritius, okay, 1834 all the way to the 1920s. Okay, then they start sending Indians to the Caribbean also. Okay, they started shipping Indian workers to British Guyana sometime in the 1830s. And the government of British India, which is the British occupation government of India, the British occupiers, they enacted some legislation in India which legalized the transportation of Indian laborers to places like Jamaica, like Trinidad, to places like Demerara. If you have heard of Demerara sugar, that's the place it came from. Then in the second half of the 19th century, from 1850s all the way to the 1870s and almost 1900, this became a systematic practice. Take Indian laborers, make them sign contracts, ship them off to some part of the world. Okay, so about 2 million Indians in total, 20 lakh, were transported as de facto slaves to, I don't know, 10, 20 colonies: Mauritius, various islands in the Caribbean, Trinidad, British Guyana, Jamaica, Suriname, okay, also to Fiji, also to Natal province in South Africa, and also to places like Malaysia, Malaya, and East Africa, also to Sri Lanka. Suriname was ruled by the Dutch. They began importing Indians in the second half of the 19th century through an agreement with the British Empire. Okay, so the British owned the goods, and the Dutch agreed with the British that we will import your goods, which is Indian laborers. And then you had Indian laborers who started coming to Suriname and started working there. They had 5-year contracts. Okay, the promise was that after your contract is over, you will be sent back home, but that hardly ever happened. So eventually, this system of indentured slavery, indentured servitude, it was ended around the second decade of the 20th century, by roughly 1920 or something. So, but whichever contracts were signed, they ran into the 1920s. So what happened is that, in India there was this severe. See, India had been deindustrialized by the British. India had been devastated by the British. The British had engineered hundreds of artificial famines in India. Indians were starving. India's economy was being destroyed in real time. There was, because India was deindustrialized, all the jatis of the various people that we have in India, their traditional occupations had been destroyed. So there was no way to earn money and to sustain families, right? So people needed employment anyhow. So that's how they were able to, lure Indians into signing contracts. The promises were often that you'll get a high wage, etc. Maybe sometimes some people were even kidnapped into doing this. Yeah. The fact is that the wages were very low. The wages could be withheld based on any flimsy pretext. Okay. um, Whatever men earned, women earned maybe two-thirds of that, maybe three-fourths of that. So women earned less than men. And if you deserted, if you did not work one day, or you tried to run away, you were treated as a criminal. um, every day you were given tasks. If you could not finish your task, then you would be severely penalized. Maybe you will be flogged, beaten. Maybe your wages will be withheld. Maybe they will fine you 3 months wages or whatever. Maybe you'll be imprisoned. Maybe you'll be killed. Killing was not that frequent, because the labor was, of course, valuable, that sort of thing. And once the contract of the indentured laborers was over, they were supposed to receive a free trip back to India, or a subsidized trip back to India. But typically this never happened. Very few of these people were able to return to India. So even eventually, over time, these indentured laborers, who were essentially de facto slaves, they just settled down in the places where they had been transported, and they became essentially the foundations of the societies, Indian societies of Trinidad, of Guyana, of Suriname, of Mauritius, Fiji, and so many others. They were able to preserve their languages, whatever language they spoke. They were able to preserve their religion, Hinduism. They were able to preserve their cultural practices. And they also created new local communities, the Indian diaspora, right? Um, so that's the story of the indentured Indians who were shipped off to faraway parts of the world, right? So it was essentially a new system of slavery. That's what it was. That's the story.